Inequality, unfairness, corruption. That's just the way things are. We're told this again and again, that there is no possibility of a better world. If you've got any better ideas, Russell, why don't you tell us them? I have got better ideas. Most of them I've got from doing my podcast on Luminary, Under the Skin. You can get it if you want details. There's a link in the description. I speak to brilliant people, experts, fine thinkers, genii, and philosophers who talk to me about the ways that society could change. Much of it does begin with belief and faith, which is why so much money is spent on propaganda, telling you a story about who you are. Propaganda is what implants external ideas into your internal world and prevents you from seeing reality, if there could ever be such a thing, as it is. First up in this video, we're talking to mythologist, storyteller Michael Meade about leaders and what our leaders believe and how our leaders' inhibitions and limitations prevent us ever entering into new visionary spaces that might benefit us all.
I think one consequence, just to go at it from there, is that we have leaders that are uninitiated, which means they are unable to imagine or envision something that benefits all the people. So they're self-referential, they're self-indulgent. I'm talking about certain people in England and certain people in the United States that are in power, that are clearly like exaggerated boys.
Michael Meade is talking about initiation there. Initiation is when a young person, a child, is taken away from their parents and initiated into the ways of the tribe, whether it's a male or a female or some other form of identification. That point of initiation means you no longer identify primarily with what you want and need. For the longest time, I thought my life is just about what I want. Sometimes I still drift back to that. Why? Because our culture tells us that that's, you're worth it, just do it. It's an individualistic culture, a materialistic culture, a rational culture that just tells you, well, our function is to survive. It decries and denies the mystical component of our being. A system of initiation around leadership might mean that people don't get into positions of authority without understanding that their duty is to the collective more than to their individual selves. Why does anyone wanna become the president of the United States or the prime minister of England or the leader of wherever it is you're from? You can see the individualism and narcissism oozing out of these people. We don't have systems that value people with a tribal collective mentality. We don't value selflessness because we have forgotten who we are. We've forgotten how we could organize society.
Initiation would take the girl or the boy into the depths of the unconscious, into also the depth of feeling. It would be intended to break open the heart. And the heart has all the deep feelings, but the heart is also the organ holding the imagination of a person's life and even capable of revealing to oneself the aim or the destiny of their life. And so we've lost, and also initiation in traditional terms would move the young person from the lap of their mother to the lap of the great mother, the lap of Mother Nature. So everybody would have an instinctive connection to nature, and everybody would have an intuitive connection to the meaning already that they're carrying. It would be an awakening of the soul. It would be considered to be a second birth, so that a person was born now not biologically, but psychologically, philosophically.
Have you had a second awakening in your own life? Have you, when you left home, when you went to university, when you took on an apprenticeship, when you got your first job, when something terrible happened, like you lost a parent? And when we just live in a sort of blunt rationalism, it's equally illusory, because all around us are mythic systems. This money is worth something. I'm an American. All these ideas are fictional. These are mythic. It's mythic to identify with a nation. If this World Cup goes well for my country, Finland, by Jove, I shall be satisfied. There is no such thing as a nation. It's a belief system. There is no such thing as currency. It's a belief system. So if from the get-go we recognize that our societies and systems are imaginary, they come through our consciousness, they require our faith, then it doesn't seem so implausible that we might design new ones. And when looking for templates for those new ones, we're better to look than the arcane world, where the rituals and systems that we evolved related to our biochemistry. They related to the way that we live and the way that we are. Another simple, obvious point is we're not evolved to live in great big communities. We're evolved to live in small groups of around 100. This is why it becomes complex when we are confronted with all sorts of different cultures, and all these cultures have to simultaneously live together. Now, that can be beautiful in a kind of a metropolitan melting pot way, but when you try to centralize a system of regulation and legislation, well, whose rights are more valuable? Whose rights are more powerful? What happens when those rights are at odds with one another? Doesn't matter if people live in tribalized societies and accept that a degree of equanimity, equality, and peace is valuable.
And that would break the bubble of egotism that is the problem with all the, the ones who want to be leaders but don't even know who they are.
Why do you want to be a leader? That's like the first question. Do you remember ever seeing Tony Benn, the British socialist politician's list about power? Who did you get this power from? How do we take it away from you? Who are you answerable to? There are pretty basic analytics available to attack positions of power, or at least address positions of power. Those usually aren't deployed precisely because they offer a critique of the powerful, and all systems have as their primary goal their own preservation. So within the limited window of debate, check the Chomsky quote, someone will use it in the comments, healthy debate within limited parameters is the foundation of our kind of neoliberalist democracies. Like people are squabbling and arguing over sort of minute territories when there are vast terrains of potential unexplored.
I see it as electing the symptoms so we could learn from it. Now, it's clear that not everybody's learning, but then again, that just indicates how many people haven't had this awakening experience.
When Michael Meade talks about electing the symptoms, it's like saying that unconscious psychological forces are at play in our culture that we unconsciously, without realizing it, recognize certain tropes and ideas are playing out in the culture, and we're magnetized to them rather than attracted to them because we're playing out unconscious psychodramas because we ourselves are unawakened.
Right now, there are so many of these would-be dictators around the world who are coming out of that authoritarian mode. And it says something about a deep misunderstanding of power, because what happens is people keep giving their power to other people and to other structures. And they couldn't operate except people give them power.
That's an interesting point about the way that power functions, that power is granted. The minute we say these institutions are not powerful, the minute we stop participating, whether that's in financial systems like debt, for example, or democratic systems as they currently operate, the minute our power is withdrawn, the power disappears. That shows you it's faith-based, illusory.
And so there's something being said about people finding their own power and not being so willing to give it away so quickly. And obviously there's no, clear sense of where this is all going to go. But the way I understand that is that we're in the liminal. And so it's our job to make sense of ourselves and to do what we can to bring meaning into the world and bring even feeling into the world.
Charles Eisenstein is a brilliant author who speaks publicly about economics, mysticism, spirituality, rationalism, different ways of organizing society. Here, he talks about the nature of the stories we tell and the kind of realities that are created as a result of those stories.
I believe that our stories are intimately related to the reality that we experience. So, for example, if we carry a story that the earth is a bunch of instrumental stuff, a bunch of resources for us to dispose with, but not alive, not conscious, not intelligent, then from that story, we will treat earth as a bunch of stuff, not alive.
What the counter argument to Charles Eisenstein's point is no, but we know that that animals don't feel much and plants aren't important, but look at the consequences of our belief system, of our myth that the world and its resources, even the word resources, are instrumental, stuff that's just there so that we can use it. Now, I'm not suggesting that we live in some anthropomorphic, mad Disney paradise. Hello, Mr. Plant. Hello, Mr. Chicken. Or me, Mrs. Chicken. Oh, you're not married? But what I'm suggesting is that if you invest the things that we share the planet with beauty and with value beyond their value to us, then you live a different life. At the moment, the only thing that's considered important, as Michael Meade said, is our individual needs, because we are uninitiated, unawoken to our adulthood, and we therefore see the world only in the terms of a sort of a hungry baby. I want this, I want that, I want that. Mad, unawakened toddlers that regard the world as a resource. Remember those kind of apocryphal tales, some of which I'm sure are perhaps true, that of when settlers arrived in what is now the United States, and they went, well, could we buy that land from you? Well, how can you buy the land? We don't own the land. The river is our brother. The sun and the stars are our friends. Oh yeah, okay, it's 50 quid then?
In other words, we hold a story that the earth is dead, we kill the earth. We hold a story that the earth is alive and sacred, then we will build a world that is alive and sacred to us. That's why I like working on the level of story, and not just intellectually, but also how do we give each other an experience of life and sacredness?
Part of what Charles Eisenstein is pointing out is that we don't question what we've been conditioned to see as normal. We don't, every time we hand over a credit card or a £20 note, recognize that this is a symbolic exchange that's taking place, that the value of the dollar or the pound or the rupee or the euro continually fluctuates in relationship to, yes, some pragmatic factors such as availability of resources, there's that word again, but also it's to do with confidence, belief, faith. It's not just this world of spiritual radicalism that seeks to create a better world that requires faith. The world you already live in requires faith. It requires faith that you believe in your nation, the rule of law. All sorts of prescriptive cultural forces are at work controlling your consciousness and the way that you see reality and the way that reality operates.
In every way, everything we do, in every interaction that we have, like to remember that, then we become participants in that story and that reality. And that is a link between traditional environmental activism and things that, from like the climate change perspective, couldn't possibly do any good.
What video that seeks to inspire us to change the world, to create new stories, new myths, see the world differently, believe in new realities, and then create them could be complete without the inclusion of the great Brené Brown. Here, Brené Brown again talks about the power of stories and the story of power. Who gets power? Who gets to maintain power? Who has to fight for power?
I started my research 6 months before 9/11. So I have really been on the ground watching the world change people and watching people change the world. Like I watched what 9/11 did, not only to this country, but just globally, you know.
9/11 was a real event, but it's also a mythic event in the fact that it presented an opportunity to create enemies, to, it looks in retrospect, exaggerate the power of those enemies, create narratives about where those enemies were geographically located and the convenience of those locations being resource-rich places.
I've never seen people, A, in so much fear, and B, so sick and tired of being afraid. So something's going to happen. But I think we're in the middle of kind of white male power over making a last stand. I think this is a last stand.
And I think it's important to point out that white male power in this instance likely means corporate and political power where there is a predominance or preeminence of white males, unquestionably. Again, though, these ideas, these stories, these narratives are used to create division in communities that are economically comparable if you are earning minimum wage or less. But the real division is people that have power, institutions that have power, people and institutions that have no power. All of the thinkers and speakers that we cited recognize that this is a liminal time, the end of a story. For me, I like to look at these myths and stories beyond the cultural narratives around forms of identification, because I see that as being divisive and causing yet more division. But the way that they are positioned, the way that these stories are told, the way that power is organized is usually designed by competing myths, and the myths that dominate tend to preserve their own systemic power and deny power elsewhere. My incentive, my dream My goal is for us to be empowered to create our own stories and as a result our own realities. If you like that video, please press like and subscribe to it. Go over to my Awakening channel where I give you all sorts of meditation and well-being tips completely for free. If you like the conversations here in this video, they all took place on my Luminary podcast, Under the Skin. You can subscribe to that. If you have Apple, you can go get it anywhere in the world, and there's a guided meditation once a week there as well. Sign up to my mailing list on russellbrand.com so I can tell you about all of the stuff that I do without having to constantly bombard you with a barrage of information. I hope that this video helped you to understand the way that power is created, that propaganda is another word for myth, and that we are all inundated with propaganda.